All right. I know this has been a little bit of a delay, but thank you everyone for your patience. Really, really appreciate it. There were some technical issues on our side, but I think we have done some firefighting and hopefully everything goes smooth. If there are some hiccups, I'm sure we can call on David, because I know David calls on other people. So I'm sure we can call on David to do some song and dance, right, David? Yeah, so we can call on some people just to kind of have a chat with each other, and it was good to hear some people reminiscing some old times. But yeah, we're really excited for this one. We have Theresa Kane with us, and she's gonna take us through how to thrive as a consultant and kind of see if this is the right career for you. Before we jump in, of course, I do like the welcome side of things, so I will invite Prayog from the AIESEC team. He's part of the AIESEC regional office of Asia Pacific, and I'll invite him to say a couple of words because we are co-hosting this with AIESEC.
Thank you so much, Gaurav, for the invitation, for the warm words. First of all, hello everyone. Welcome from whichever part of the world you're joining this program from. My name is Prayog. I am a proud AIESECer. I am currently a part of AP Regional Office, and I have my colleague Serafina also joining here with us. We have been co-hosting and co-managing these A-Talks along with the AIESEC Alumni Asia Pacific team. And this is the 10th one. We started with, I think, from R86 onwards. The AIESEC Asia Pacific members and the national teams are really excited and to take forward this collaboration as well. So I have been working with the current national teams, and we are together with the regional office and also Alumni Association. We are bringing upon programs like this A-Talk, the mentorship programs, and also more close collaboration with each other in order to have like a smooth transition from an AIESEC experience to AIESEC alumni experience as well. So really, really, really honored and glad to be here. And I officially welcome all of you to this Regional A-Talk number 10. Back to you, Gaurav.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Stefan. We have a special request actually from David, because David and Theresa have been very close friends for a while. So I'll invite David to say a couple of words over here.
Thank you, Gaurav.
Be nice, David.
Well, just before I get to Theresa, so yes, this is an example of our co-managed, co-promoted events together with AIESEC. And there'll be another one that we're going to promote at the very end of the session as well, which we'll tell you about then. So as the account that we're using is here, where I am in Melbourne, Australia, let me just do this first, please. So in the spirit of reconciliation, AIESEC Alumni Asia Pacific acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. We pay our respect to their elders, past and present, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples today. Okay, Theresa Kane. So my first memory of Theresa was when she actually was leading a sing-along on a bus going from the accommodations to a president's meeting in Helsinki in 1980, I want to say, end of 80.
81, David.
Yeah, okay. I believe you, thousands wouldn't, but I'll go along with it. One does learn over the years not to argue with Theresa. and AIESEC itself delivers all these extraordinary moments. Well, for me, one of the real highlights was both meeting Theresa and having the good fortune to be able to maintain that friendship for all this length of time. So all I can tell you is that Theresa, she's a legend within the AIESEC community. She's obviously done incredibly well for her career in Canada. And yes, one of my ulterior motives is to use this as the thin edge of the wedge to eventually encourage Theresa to be more active in the actual management of the alumni, but that's another conversation. So look, with that, it's just an absolute personal delight to have Theresa here. So that's really all I'll have to say at the moment. Welcome, Theresa, and I'll pass it to you to Gaurav to give a few more details.
Awesome. That was pretty nice, actually, David. Uh, but yeah, I just want to keep some expectations. Also, be engaged, participate enthusiastically, of course. We really encourage you to keep your camera on. There might be some breakout sessions in this space, so be ready to kind of converse with other people. Of course, mute yourself when you're not speaking and unmute yourself when you want to. We'll have a Q&A at the end of the presentation, and then we'll go into some housekeeping. So yes, that's the agenda for today. I have gone through the introduction almost. Then we'll move on to Theresa. We'll have a Q&A space, some feedback, and some housekeeping. All right. Okay, so let me tell you a little bit about Theresa Kane. I do have a bio in front of me, and I'm going to tell you some important points from it, but I want to also tell everyone my experience, even though it's only been a couple of meetings with her. You can really, to be very honest with you, you can really see how experienced she is as a consultant. And I don't say this just because she is a consultant, but it's also like very reflective in the way she like talks to you and kind of interacts with you. I have interacted with like a lot of speakers, but like Theresa is a speaker who really probes into you and your life. And I think that there's asking those questions and you kind of answering, of course, makes her of course, come across as a very genuine person. And I wholly believe that she is. And she asked me question after question just to kind of understand my personal life, not just about what the event is about, what are we going to say, what are we going to do. Yeah, we did all of that, but then I think we had a very good personal conversation, and I really appreciate that, because that really shows that as a consultant, as a leader, you kind of ask more questions, let the person in front of you talk, be fully interested in them, and you really come across as a very strong leader. So I'm really happy to have you here, Theresa, as a speaker, and I know you're gonna, pardon my French, but kick ass at this presentation. But just a little bit about Theresa. She has been self-employed for I guess almost 30 years now, if I'm not mistaken. She started off with her own marketing communications company prior to 92, was it? 94. And this was a marketing communications company dedicated to the healthcare and education sector. So very cool things. After her marketing communications company, she has been a self-employed consultant, operating as Piper and Company Inc. for 15, 16 years now, maybe probably more than that. And she primarily works with associations in Canada to develop strategic plans, conducting organizational reviews and special projects which cover a range of management and governance issues. Yeah, she's also a part-time faculty at a couple of universities, and she teaches marketing, communications. She also teaches strategic planning, consumer behavior. So a lot of things going on for her. So great person to have, to listen to as a speaker, but to also have in the community. Her AIESEC experience, I think she's gone through almost every role that is to go through as an AIESECer. She was a VP, VP communications and VP special projects. And it was a very interesting story she told me as well as to how she joined AIESEC. Her friend and her were, I guess, going to get drinks or something at some point in the evening, and her friend dragged her along to this AIESEC info session, like many of us have been dragged along to AIESEC info sessions, and and she was supposed to go out with a friend, but then that started her AIESEC journey, and she's gone to every position. Yeah, so she was also a National Committee Exchange Controller at AIESEC Canada. She's represented Canada at international conferences and presidents' meetings in Denmark, Helsinki, Coventry, Barcelona, Atlanta, Germany. I think you've pretty much traveled the whole world just by being an AIESEC, which is fantastic. She was elected director of Asia Pacific at AIESEC International, serving the 11 member committees of Asia at that point. She's been a member of the executive body of AIESEC International, specifically responsible for the global exchange program. So I guess back at the times when we had pink and green slips. Yes. And she's also served as a director on the board of AIESEC Canada for 3 years, and then ultimately going on to chair the board. So fantastic CV, fantastic AIESEC experience, traveled the world. But yeah, enough of me. I'll hand it over to you, Theresa.
I have to remember to send both David and you, Gaurav, $20 for those intros.
Yeah.
Could I have the part of that recording? Because my mother won't believe that, but it's good. It's good to know. So thank you. It's a pleasure to be speaking with all of you today. Thank you for joining me for my Sunday morning coffee. You know, the one thing about being an AIESECer is once you have been an AIESECer, you're always an AIESECer. So there's so many times every day that I'm reminded of the influence AIESEC had, you know, which simply is turning on the news. You know, we have had a year of, or actually 16 months of a pandemic now where that has affected the entire world. And there's been stories on the Canadian news about what's happening in Canada, obviously, as well as the rest of the world. And every time a country gets mentioned, there's a little part of my brain that says, ooh, I've been there. Ooh, I know so-and-so. I wonder how they are. I wonder how they're doing. So we were very, very fortunate as a bunch of people entering our career to create a global network. And I'm always grateful for it. So let us dig in. If you could give me the next slide, please. What we're going to talk about today is how to thrive as a consultant, very specifically as a consultant in a small firm. I know lots of folks AIESECers do work for places like Deloitte, Touche, and McKinsey and Anderson and large firms, and that's certainly a good way to go. What I wanted to talk about, though, is the AIESEC spirit that tends to make a lot of us interested in being self-employed. Very specifically, I want to talk about how to do good work as a consultant. So what we're going to specifically talk about today is 4 things. We're going to have a conversation about if consulting is the right fit for you. We're going to talk about how to decide, how to know the business you're in, what you have to offer, how to position yourself, so your value proposition. We're going to talk about how to take your first assignment, which most of us get through luck, into a career, and then the art of pricing, how to get paid for the work that you do competitively and fairly. David and I have had lots of conversations over the years, and I certainly am a firm believer in doing good work and in work that makes a difference, but also being fairly compensated for it. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Next slide, please. Okay, so the first thing is fit. I believe that careers take off when you do something you love, when it's a natural fit for you, and you get the luxury of doing your best work about something you're passionate and making a living at it. I'm not a great believer that you should work from your weaknesses and strengthen them. I'm a great believer that you should work with your strengths and leverage them, so to keep on refining them. And through that process, you will find something that feels like the right fit. Consulting is certainly the right fit for me. It has been for years. It isn't the right fit every day, though. There are some days, there are some moments, there are some projects where I struggle more than others. Most consulting assignments end up in a final report. And I will to this day admit that once it is clear in my mind what needs to happen or what I want to recommend to a client, actually writing a report is hard. It's a drag. I have to tie myself to my chair and make myself work really hard. But the process up until then is very pleasurable, and delivering a report and seeing its impact is always very pleasurable. So every career has its moments, its phase in an assignment that isn't quite pleasant. But let's take a look at what those qualifications are. Next slide, please. So I specifically thought that this presentation would be of interest to AIESECers for the simple reason that I think a lot of the things that attract us to AIESEC and did attract us to AIESEC, and those natural traits that many of us possess, are the things that are essential in consulting. So I'm going to ask you a little bit, if you consider yourself a knowledge seeker, you likely have the makings of a good consultant. If you thrive in variety, and most AIESECers I know thrive in variety, you will do well in consulting. If you like to rebel a bit, not too much, but a bit in a tight organizational structure, then consulting is for you. If you don't do well in a very rigid hierarchy, then that is a sign that maybe your independent spirit will help you do well as a consultant. If you want your work to have meaning, one of the most beautiful things about consulting is after a while, you get to kind of pick your clients, and by picking your clients, you get to pick the work that means the most to you. And do you value freedom in your time, freedom with your time? I went from having the marketing communications studio that was mentioned in the intro to being to only doing consulting when my kids were about 6 and 8. I went from having an office and staff and payroll to being on my own in a self-employed capacity in a home-based business. One of the reasons is I wanted different professional challenges, but the other secret reason is it gave me so much freedom with my kids. I worked full time, I had a career, yet I could do things like slip into a car and take a meeting with a client while my kids were at a sports event. I could take vacation whenever I wanted. I could drive down to baseball tournaments in the United States and get there nice and early, work day all day Friday, and I never had to ask a boss. And that meant a lot to me. So my kids experienced me as a very present mom, and I got the benefit of having a career. So to me, that was an awful lot. That was a tremendous value. And then next slide, please. The final thing I would suggest to help you assess your skill as a consultant, I know lots of folks who have the particular skill set that I have. That means that they professionally could do well as a consultant. But what I believe is that there's a trade-off out there. Some people are really are good at office politics. They thrive in that hierarchy, and they don't mind being in a situation where one has to carefully navigate the relationships around you. And some folks are good at that. I think of a good friend of mine that I went to business school with, a friend called Sheila. Sheila's better at office politics than I am. But what I am better at is cash flow management. So even if you're a successful consultant, there's times that you have a lot of cash and there's a lot of money coming in. And there's times, especially when you're busy, that you are not at a logical stage to invoice. So while your time is being used and you're making money, you don't quite have the money that you want. So my belief is that that's a bit of a yin and yang. If you're good, Sheila, who's very good at office politics and has carved out a brilliant career as a consultant in a large firm, doesn't like not getting paid every 2 weeks. I don't mind not getting paid every 2 weeks, but I'm not especially good at politics. And I believe that's a yin and yang kind of thing. Most people are somewhere on that spectrum. Next slide, please. So here are the 10 objective skills that tend to make one good as a consultant. The first is creative thinking. If you're the person in a room that comes up with a new way to look at an old problem, you have the root of a consulting skill. If you are a good conceptual thinker, a good person at coming up with frameworks and trying to figure out the patterns of what's going on, you're good at taking the patterns of what you from one client and applying them to another, or the pattern of one industry and applying it to another, then you are a good conceptual thinker. My friends tease me because they say that I speak like a consultant, that I often talk about things in terms of hierarchies and frameworks and trade-offs, and that is all consulting thinking. And why those frameworks are so important and why I like applying them is they are a template for understanding specific situations in a general way. And when you've understood specific situations in a general way, you can then apply that expertise back to the specific situation. If you are a practical problem solver, and I'm actually all about practical, I do like frameworks. I talk to clients a lot about frameworks, but at the end of the day, my job is to solve whatever problem they are presenting me with in a way that makes sense to them, in a way that takes their organization wherever they are on their continuum and moves them the number of steps forward that they need to move. Strong analytical skills. What I mean by strong analytical skills is every consultant I know at some point has got to be able to run the numbers. Many clients have a problem that they can't define, and if they can't define, it's often because they haven't looked at their own financial situation or key indicators, attendance at events, turnover rate in employees, amount of money that goes to interest payments at bank, whatever their key indicator is. You need to be comfortable digging into that. And with probably 80% of my clients, I usually point out something to them in their business that is data that they have that they're not aware of. So that doesn't make me nervous to do that. It actually makes me very confident to anchor things in the truth. Strong communication skills, written and verbal. Written skills are important from the get-go, from the first introduction through to a proposal. And strong communication skills are critical when you are effectively trying to bring about change. Not only are strong communication skills as a base critical, it's also knowing who your audience is so you speak to them at the right level. I try and alter my vocabulary, and I use the jargon of clients. I also alter the complexity with which I write and speak depending on the audience that I'm speaking to. And the reason I do this is so they can hear me. If there's nothing that clients understand more than they understand where I want to take them and where I think they should go if I bring them along. And I can only bring them along if I've communicated with them. Empathetic listener. When I'm at the first step in a consulting assignment, I do far more listening than talking. I ask questions. I try and create comfort. If I'm doing an organizational review, and organizational reviews are usually when an organization is in a crisis of some kind, there's a deep, deep conflict, and it is the source of that conflict is unknown. It is generally turned into blaming. So I do individual interviews with each volunteer director, each individual interviews likely with each staff person. In order for people to tell me their truth, they have to trust me. I promise them confidentiality, or I promise them that their comments will never be attributed to them. I promise them confidentiality. And honestly, I often take out a box of Kleenex because people are upset. But if I convey to them that I'm on their side and I'm on the side of solving the problem, then they will tell me. And most often a consulting situation, consulting solution is not in the frameworks and the general thinking and the analysis. The consulting solution is known by the people in the organization. They just don't know that they know it. A confident leader is another key skill. And leadership takes its form in lots of places in a consulting assignment, but essentially the first time it takes its form is one has to know when to follow and when you're at the listening phase versus when to start offering solutions. So there's instinct and there's leadership. But we always have to remember in consulting that if you are actually bringing an organization along, I never want to give people a solution that dies the minute I've sent a final invoice. I want to empower people with a solution that they have bought into, that they have contributed to, that makes sense to them. One of the things I do with connecting empathetic listener and confident leader is when I interview people, I take notes and I make notes of some of the phrases that they use, and I try and use their phrases in the final report. And the reason I do that is if people have heard themselves, then they're much more likely to participate in the solution. You know, the old saying, if people plan the battle, they don't battle the plan. Have to be good with organization and time management. You have to be good with that from the time you set the price through to the time that you manage all the steps of a project. I manage projects in terms of deliverables, and I'll talk a bit more about that. You got to be good at that. And you've also got to be really respectful of your client's time. They are not hiring you to add more to their burden. They're hiring you to lessen their burden. So I try and use senior people's time, especially, really, really efficiently. I'm organized, I'm together. My technology works. I am on. I say I start a meeting at the time I promise I will. I end it no later than the time I will, and I always meet project interim reports. Got to be credible. Credible to me is the right skills, knowing when to use the right skills, deliver it in the right way, to offer advice that makes sense, to source advice that's more controversial so that people know that you know what you're talking about. Credibility also comes from lots of other intangibles. I think it's related to confidence. I think it's related to passion. We all know credible people when we meet them, and we all know people that are not credible. So I don't quite know what the magic is around credibility. I joke sometimes that one of the reasons I'm credible is I happen to have a fairly low voice, and that tends to lend credibility, whatever. And then finally, and the last skill that I would say is the most important, and I know AIESECers have got this, everyone who's here on this call has got this, curiosity. I am a deeply, deeply curious person. It's reflected in the travel that I've done. It's reflected in the travel all of you have done, the people I've had conversations with, the kinds of things we get to talk about, the news stories we follow. I have, give me almost any topic, and I'm at least interested in digging, a couple of inches or a couple centimeters deep. And I know many AIESECers share that trait. And to me, curiosity is the thing that drives all the other skills. If you're not especially curious now, it may not be a career for you, but if you are curious and you're lacking some of the other skills we've talked about, most of these other skills can be acquired. So curiosity is actually the thing that holds it all together. Next slide, please. We're going to go into breakout rooms because this is all theoretical up until now. We're going to go into breakout rooms for 5 minutes. We're going to put you in groups of 2. I'm going to ask each of you to working in pairs you're going to be assigned to people you may not know. So it's going to be a bit of a discussion, but I'm going to ask you to rank yourself on the 10 skills I just mentioned. Give yourself a 0 if it's not a skill you currently possess. Give yourself a 5 if it's not a skill you yet have, but you believe it could be. For example, you may not have done a ton of presentations, but you've got good written skills. Likely you've got what it takes to be a good presenter. Give yourself a 10 if the skill is already an innate part of you. I'm going to give you 5 minutes. We're going to come back and talk about the results. So if you know, this is obviously not scientific, but what I would say as an observation, if your curiosity is 10, and I would give all AIESECers a 10, if your curiosity is 10 and the rest of your score is less than 50, you know, you may want to decide how to build up skills so that you can thrive as a consultant. I would say that listening skills and leadership are things that can be developed. Communication skills are certainly courses you can take. Analytical skills are also courses you can take. So if your fundamental nature is curiosity and problem solving, then I think most of the rest can be acquired. What might be interesting for you is to do the self-assessment now to sort of see your starting point as you're considering a consulting career, and then to do the self-assessment in after you've been doing it for 6 months and to see if anything has changed. So people will have this, right? People can download it now and keep this, right? It's happened? Okay, yep. Good. Okay, good. So let's move on to the next slide, please. So the first thing the most important thing as a consultant, and I actually think it's the most important thing in your own self-talk, is you need to define your value. You need to be clear and be able to articulate to clients how you can improve their world. They come to you with a problem. Clients rarely, by the way, know what their specific problem is. They know they have a general issue. They usually think their specific problem is quite different from what you conclude their problem to be. But you need to be able to say, yes, I have seen this before, or yes, this is common, or yes, I have the skills to help you solve this. Here's how I will go about solving it. And here's how your world, your life, your business, your association will be better as a result of having worked with me. And this is where the credibility comes in, because clients have got to take a leap of faith in you and believe when you say that you can solve these things, that it's true. One of the challenges in consulting, and it's why the value proposition is also important, is you can never say, I solve problem X for client Y. Any work that you do by definition is confidential. So you've got to speak about it generally enough that you are protecting people's confidentiality and trust they've placed in you. You can never breach that, but you have to be specific enough to do that, yet credible enough that people believe it's not just a textbook solution. So let's take a look at this. Next slide, please. Okay. Actually, we're going to skip this one. There we go. So the first thing is you need to be able to focus your sales and marketing, determine what kind of businesses are profitable clients. I often get asked, for example, to do business plans for individuals, and I don't do that. And the reason I don't do that is it's not my area of expertise. And generally, my fees are not consistent with what that particular sector can pay. There's also no repeatability. I look for clients where I can do similar kind of work. Therefore, I'm more productive and I'm delivering value more quickly. My particular niche, just to help you understand that, is my work. I do work with professional associations. So I do organizational reviews, strategic planning, and special projects for professional associations. And professional associations are things like doctors, doctors, real estate agents, medical radiation technologists, dental hygienists, the Canadian Cancer Society, the Nurses Union of New Brunswick, all folks that their experience together is based on their career, much like AIESEC. So it's no coincidence that I do that. Next step. You need to be able to develop the picture of your ideal client, what industries you want to work in, what company sizes, what geographic location, what demographic characteristics. I have figured out over the years that I do best in associations whose budgets are in excess of 2 million, but not something that's 100 million, because 100 million is going to want a whole team, and I'm not interested in creating a team. Decide the industries you're interested in will likely come to you through practice, but you may start off with some you're interested in. If, for example, some of you are interested in sustainable development, I know lots of AIESECers are, do a list of the associations and companies in your community that offer those services. Next slide, please. Yeah. Identify the buyer persona. So my clients are associations, but the decision makers, the people who have the power to say yes or no to me, are generally chief executive officers or chairs of the board. So I know by definition, they're folks who likely have significant expertise, a master's. They're experts, if they're on the staff side, they're experts in association governance. If they're on the volunteer side, they are experts in whatever their association does. I spent some time thinking about that. I spent some time thinking about their level of education to decide how to pitch a proposal to them, and also how to pitch a final report. If I don't speak to people at the level that they're ready to hear from me, they won't hear it. I also pay some attention to their psychographics. What is their wants, their needs, their challenges and aspirations? What are their pain points? For lots of associations these days, their pain points tend to be in lobbying the government to get the kind of accreditation they want. I don't do work in the charity sector. If I did work in the charity sector, their pain point is very commonly fundraising. In private sector companies, it's often market share or expanding distribution strategies, or setting up barriers to competitors. Or the other really common one is keeping pace with technology. Next slide. Oh, no, not that far. A little further back. There should have been 2 more. Okay, yeah, okay, there we go. So if you know who your buyer is, you know your area of specialization, you need to commit to a marketing strategy. And this is all about growing your business. Most of us get our first assignment by luck. I got my first assignment because someone had seen me do something entirely different, and they thought that I would be good at an organizational review, that I would have both the toughness and the compassion to go in. I really didn't have the confidence I could do it. I did it. And since that time, I've done something like 27 organizational reviews. So my first assignment was luck, and the next was strategy. It's really important you commit to a marketing strategy. You know, a classic market strategy has content marketing. You write emails to people on general topics, and you stay in front of them. So when they're ready to make a decision, they remember you. I'm big on news tracking. If I'm working on anything to do, for example, when I was doing the project with New Brunswick Nurses Union, I Googled search, I put a Google alert on anything to do with the nursing profession, on unions, on government negotiations. So if I saw anything in that space, I'd send it to my client, the decision maker, somebody I really respect, and say, hey, didn't know if you saw this. It shows them, it's legitimate from me. It shows them that I care. It shows them that I stay on top of their issues. It also it enhances my credibility. You have to have a website that's professional, that has mobile access. It's a shocking number of people do online searches, even for things in the professional space. Do invest in search engine optimization. If someone Googles organizational reviews in Canada, I come up in the first 10. I actually need to reinvest in that, so I continue to do that. But the internet is the key to getting a lot of business. And then social media and emails. Now, this is a huge marketing list. One does not, as a self-employed consultant as I have been, I don't need to do all of these things. This would be full-time marketing. If I had a firm behind me and I had lots of employees, I would, because my job would be to keep the funnel full. But given that Piper is a small company that hires subcontractors when needed, my main marketing things are news tracking and doing content-based newsletters. And finally, the next step is, and I think for people who have a firm my size, the most important is networking and referrals. Make sure you do good work. If you aren't doing good work, no one is going to refer you. If you have client relationships that are contentious, no one is going to refer you. If you have client relationships where there was a difficult problem and you stepped away from the final recommendation, you lacked the courage to tell them what they needed to hear, you won't get referrals. And if you had the courage to tell them what they needed to hear, but you said it in a way that was aggressive or undiplomatic or unproductive or attributing blame rather than seeking solutions, you won't get good work. So doing good work is the basis of getting continued consulting work. Do ask for testimonials. I always ask clients how they felt about working, and they generally say things that are kinder than I would say about my own work. Do stay in touch with clients, even if you're not doing active work, and solve real problems. As I mentioned, clients generally come to you with problem X, and the solution I come back with involves client X, it involves problem X, but it's also NOPQRXT, everything else that is the complete solution. You do have to solve what they came to you for, but very rarely do clients have a good understanding of what the core problem is. And that's your job as a consultant, using your analytical skills and creative problem solving to give them a true solution. This page, this diagram is part of your handout. I would encourage you to use it as you consider a consulting career and ask yourself in depth how each of these things play out. Next slide, please. Okay. So one of the things that people struggle the most with in consulting is knowing how to charge. And most people in consulting, especially self-employed consultants like me, undercharge. And if you undercharge, it actually is harder to get work, because if you're undercharging, people think you don't know what you're doing. So it's really, really important to charge competitively so that you can win the business, but also to charge in such a way that enhances your credibility. If you think about it, if people are coming to you to have a rewrite of their whole organization, they don't expect to get that at a bargain basement. And if they do, they're likely not the right client for you. So what are the 3 methods of pricing? Next slide, please. Okay, the first thing is hourly based. Hourly based is really quite simple. Figuring out your billable rate. Which the best way to do that is to understand what your competition is charging. But in the absence of knowing what your competition is charging, figure out the annual salary for that particular task. So if you're doing a marketing plan, what would you get as a vice president of marketing? Or if you're doing a strategy, what would you get as a CEO in that kind of company? Divide that by the number of billable days and by the number of weeks. So I would say in most months, if you are working 10 billable days, you have a full-time consulting practice. I like to work no more than 48 weeks a year. So I used $100,000 just because it's easy math. $100,000 divided by 10 billable days by 48 weeks a year gives a billable rate of $208 an hour. This is actually not my billable rate, by the way, just an example. The key to this method is to track your time. And everyone hates tracking time. I, to this day, hate tracking my time. But if I don't track my time, I'm giving away my inventory. It's really, there is a lot of software out there that will help you do that. If you don't want to go as complicated as software, this is very sophisticated. I actually write my time in my day timer. I do a little line and I write my start time and end time on every task, and I track it as I'm doing it. And if you don't track it as you do it, what research shows is you are underbilling likely by 25%. So billable hours. The next, and my favorite way of billing projects is project-based billing. That is, before I get work, I figure out with a client and I write a project plan. I estimate the steps that are going to be involved. I generally try and figure out to make it 5 or 6 steps because clients can wrap their head around that. I identify the deliverable at each step. So for example, the first step is a briefing and organization, a briefing, review of documents, and setting up the structure. The deliverable about that at the end of that is a confirmed project plan with an interview schedule. The next step is internal interviews. I give a list of who I'm going to be talking to, what I'm going to talk about, how long I'm going to talk, and the deliverable is harnessing key insights provided by employees. External review, same thing. External stakeholders, government funders, whoever that might be, same thing. So I come up with the hours in each step. I then add the total number of, then I then come up with the total number of billable days. So suppose a very common size project for me would be 20 billable days. I take that 20 billable days and I figure out how to get it up to 30 and make it credible. And the reason I do that is most of us underestimate our time. So take whatever you figure your billable time is going to be and estimate it by 1.5. And then even if I've done it on a project basis, I track my time. I track my time so that if I've wildly overestimated, I actually charge the client the lower amount. But more likely, if I track my time, I get better at estimating. So over time, that 1.5 multiplier can become lower and I become more competitive and I get business more often. And finally, the third method that's used by consultants is value-based. That is figuring out the upside of the advice you're going to give. So if you are doing a marketing strategy or a customer retention strategy, and you figure out that if they do what you say, they can retain 40% more clients. You can likely, using their data, figure out the dollar value of that. That will mean $2 million more in business a year. And you can charge on the percentage basis of that. I'm not fond of that as a method. And the reason I'm not fond of that is if you are a value-based consultant, you are assuming that you have control over how much a client implements. And you don't. Clients may not implement everything you say. My experience is that if they implement 60% of what you say, you're doing really well. They eventually get to 100% over time, but at the end of a final report, they're not ready to implement everything. They've got to test things a little bit. If you do value-based, your earnings are tied to their implementation and you don't have control on their implementation. The other thing I would suggest is if you are a value-based consultant, it kind of silences you a bit because your upside it then becomes based more on the politics. And you can't say everything that you are no longer the independent advisor that people want you to be. So the upshot of all of this is my preferred method to work with clients is the middle method, which is project-based. I do track my time. I set out the deliverables. And then, because I'm interested in referrals, I make sure I deliver on all of them. So next slide. How to get started. Many of you are at the early stages of your career. My first suggestion is work with a consultant. Work on a subcontract basis. Get a project from somebody that may not actually be technically a consulting assignment, but do it as a consultant would, and you'll get that experience. Take a course in consulting or get accreditation. I know in Canada, if you've got a certain level of education, you can go to a place called Canadian Management Consultants and get actually certified. And there's lots of other ways to do it. If you Google it, you'll find things in your country now that they enable you to do it. Increase your exposure. I don't do this as much as I used to, but I used to go to lunches. I used to go to networking events in the industries I was interested in. I used to ask fellow consultants to do information coffees with me, and I just increased my exposure. And then the final step, in my marketing, my point was to really target and to figure out your area of interest. My final step is say yes to any work at first. You likely may not know your complete areas of expertise. You want to say yes to any work to deepen your area of expertise. You also want to say yes to any work so you get experience. And through that process, you will refine your consulting skill set as well as your level as well as your level of exposure and your level of knowledge. Next slide. And that's all the talking from me. I know I don't want to abuse your time. Questions, comments? Can we turn the slide off so I can see people's nice faces? Here we go. Thank you. Questions, comments?
Okay, yes. So yeah, if anyone has questions, just raise your hand or put it in the chat box. Or the best thing is, of course, to unmute yourself and just ask.
Oh, look at I'm looking at the chat scores. Look at those scores. We've got a 65, 80, 86, 72, 80, 82, 87, 89. That's fantastic. That's fantastic. That means lots of you have the key skill sets to become consultants.
Wow.
And then it could very well be a very good natural fit with you. I knew AIESECers would. Anybody have any questions?
Hi, Theresa. If I may.
Hi, Jack.
Thanks so much for the amazing presentation. I think it makes a lot of sense. I do actually have a question. When it comes to consulting on a client and understanding their problem, how do you overcome the hurdle of understanding, avoiding bias towards a particular sort of industry or things that you may have already worked on? And how do you reach the conclusion that that is a particular problem that you are facing? Therefore, my solution is going to be based on that. So how do you sort of avoid that bias and understand that?
Two things. I mean, all of us have biases, right? I know some of mine. So it's kind of good to know your personal biases going in so you can guard against them. I assume I apply all of those things, the templates and the skills we talked about. However, I do assume every client is a clean slate, and I force myself to the discipline of pretending I've never heard it before. So I'm very it's when I take notes. It's a silly thing. When I take notes, I take them by hand. I don't type them in front of a client because if you type notes in front of a client, it intimidates them and it silences them. So I use, this is so dumb, I use this half to take notes. And then, and as they say things, I start writing down theories and catchphrases, or I start writing down the documents I need to check. One person telling me something is not a trend. 3 or 4 people point out the same thing, and I think, wow, I really need to dig into that further. So I use this for thought bubbles, and I use this for the notes. So that I pretend everything is a clear problem. I'm a detective. I think of myself as a detective. You know, Columbo, or who's a famous detective nowadays? Columbo's dated. Anybody a fan of the TV show Line of Duty? The British TV show Line of Duty. It's about corrupt police officers. Well, the detectives in that always assume a clean slate. So that's what I try to do.
Thank you very much.
I do see some people have hands. I think we'll go for Serafina first.
Yeah.
And then
okay.
Alejandro.
Thank you. Okay. Yep. Okay. So my question is, hello. Thank you for the whole presentation. It's very thoughtful, and also it provides a lot of insights towards the whole consulting industry. I have a question. Like, I guess like there's also a lot of current AIESECers, like MCVPs, that is going to step out of the AIESEC role. So I would just ask a question like that is very common. Is that we have this question like, how do we transit out of our roles into consulting? Because our AIESEC experience is very understandable, let's say in this group, because we all have been in AIESEC. But how can we translate the experience we have in AIESEC to, let's say, like when we apply for a consulting job and they ask us about job experience, they may not understand what AIESEC is doing, and how can we articulate that? Or do you have some advices that we should take or build up a portfolio in that sense?
It's a great question. I think instead of thinking about AIESEC as a whole, if you wanted to translate it into consulting, think about the specific things you've done. So if you've been the communications person, you have expertise in writing newsletters and social media. That's what people are interested in. If you've been the events person, you've got experience in sourcing speakers, in developing content, in promoting education, organizing logistics. If you have been the LCP, or let's say the NCP, if you've been the NCP, you have experience in representing your country on an international forum. So I would explain the AIESEC piece in 1 or 2 sentences. You know, the largest, you know, I'm sure you all have your own way of explaining it, but I would actually take the skills that you have acquired, whatever them, if you've been the budget person, you've developed budgets for a multinational association. So present it in the way employers hire would be what I would do. If you have been the president, you have chaired meetings and you have brought the group to consensus, key consulting skill. So.
Okay, thank you so much for that.
Awesome. I think Nirmani had a question which is probably answered or is quite similar. So we'll go to Alejandro and then Laura.
Hello. Sorry, I don't have the camera on. I'm on the street, as you can hear. Yeah. So my question is it's more about information about previous customers. Right now, I have always these thoughts in the laptop or whatever, sometimes there is information from previous customers, and I see it sometimes as a liability, previous employers and stuff like that. What is your approach towards keeping information from previous customers? I still cannot put my finger on that. In my case, I am in the very technical business, so yeah.
It's harder. It's harder in a technical business. So in terms of the marketing piece, I rarely identify clients by name. So the people, and I often do testimonials without names, and I know that that's not as credible, but it is a way. Because I never want to breach confidentiality, I stay 10,000 kilometers away from it. So I talk about things like mid-sized association, small association. I also try to never use examples. I do a lot of work in real estate associations. There's many, many of them. I almost never use a real estate association example with another real estate association, because odds are they're going to guess who it is. In technical terms, it gets trickier, because people are, you also have to be careful as a consultant that people are not using you to do competitive analysis. So I can't give you a specific thing to do other than to say, careful about the jargon you use, careful about the product names, make sure the things that you are saying are always in the public domain. And be very systematic about that. And you can never, if you were starting a sentence that said, I had a client that used to, stop. Like, you can't be doing that. Because your job is to take all that knowledge and templates and apply it from a neutral base. I don't know if that answers your question. I have a feeling I didn't there, Alejandro.
Yes, it does. It does. It is, for me, it has been particularly difficult when I have received proposals to attend calls from competition companies, or not directly, and of course I reject all that, really straightforward. But then that makes me think about the information I keep about my customers, and if maybe is too identifiable and this sort of thing, and it gets really tricky. So sometimes I just think about deleting. I deleted some customer data, and that's it. And if they come back as a customer, I will have to remember a lot of stuff. But
yeah, I have very good files, because if a client comes back to me after a year and a half, they expect you to remember. And like, I don't necessarily, once I've done a final report, I tend to clear my brain of it. So if I can, so what I would suggest you do there is, most things you're trying to figure out what template you want to apply, because if you figure out what template you want to apply, you can get to the depth of a client solution. But then once you've gotten to the depth of their specific solution, start thinking about it again in terms of templates. So it's a template to understand a specific solution for the client, but it's a template when you're talking about it to other people. So you can say, I had an association where there was conflict between the volunteer board of directors and executive officer. They thought it was personal. In fact, the problem turned out to be that they had not raised their fees in 7 years, were not keeping track with cost of living. Therefore, staff were underpaid and the organization was underinvested. That could be anybody. So that's what I would suggest the process is.
Okay, awesome. We are sure, of course, like we are over time, so I'll have, I guess Kiki has a question in the chat, and then we'll go, I guess, with Laura as the last question person. Kiki asks, do you collaborate with other consultants on projects, and how do you kind of organize that?
I do. Usually on bigger projects, to be honest, it's hard, because every consultant, it's good. Let me back up. The upside of collaborating is that you are a more credible team for larger work. Mm-hmm. And you can do bigger clients. Bigger clients have bigger problems. The problems have more scope to them. And so it's more interesting. As you likely can tell, is probably no trade secret. It takes a bit of ego to do this work. I'm probably even projecting that now without knowing it. It takes a bit of ego to do this work. So if you're doing it with another consultant, it's pretty important at the deliverable stage to decide who is leading what part. Mm-hmm. When I have done work with people, I've tried to be very respectful of their areas of expertise. So look for someone who is harder to work with, because they have a complementary skill set, as opposed to someone who has someone who's identical to you. It's you're going to butt heads. So I will work with someone who's better at statistics than me, and then I will trust them. They will work at someone who they will pick me because I'm good at interviews. So assign things so you're not stepping on each other's territory. That's one way to split it. The other way to split it is clients will have a different affinity. So I will especially bond with the executive officer and the chair of the board, for example, and a colleague will bond with the folks who are in membership recruitment or the members at the chapter level, whatever that might be, and cultivate those relationships so they see you as their point person and don't step on each other's territory. And that happens naturally. People will pick you.
Yeah.
So if I may follow up, so you don't really necessarily split responsibilities on like you are project lead or you are project lead. You kind of split tasks, more to say.
That's assuming that's assuming the person I'm collaborating with is at the same level as me. I would split tasks. If it's someone that's a subcontract, then I would do the project lead.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, thank you very much.
And sometimes, because of the nature of the client, I've got subcontractors working for me, and the client doesn't meet them. Now, the downside with that is the subcontractors aren't connected with the client, and they don't feel part of my interest in a problem comes because I'm talking to them. It goes deeper. So that can be a bit cold, a bit textbooky.
All right.
Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Kiki. I hope I'm saying your name right also. Laura, can we have you ask your question?
Hi, thank you. I apologize for the camera being turned off. Theresa, thank you so much for a great presentation. I really enjoyed it. And I have to say that the biggest part that I enjoyed was the fact that you said you were able to combine career and motherhood, which is something that I'm afraid of in the future. So I'm an AIESEC alumni from Croatia. I have my own business for 3 years and I have a few questions. I know that we are over time, so I will just take one. I wanted to ask you which classes or courses would you recommend for someone who is just starting out so they can get certified? And I wanted to ask you, is it okay to reach out to you via email with a few other questions that I have?
I was going to say, if you want to talk about the motherhood balancing piece, by all means, reach out to me. I would be happy to talk about that. I mean, that was a real, my sons are now 25 and almost 23. So they experienced me as a stay-at-home mother, and my God, I wasn't even close to a stay-at-home mom. So that is a big theme. 75% of consultants are men and 25% are women. And I believe that a lot of women are, if you do consulting in a large firm, you can't keep balance, but if you do it on your own, you can. And if you look at that skill set, there's a lot of those skills that are often attributed to women, like the empathetic listening. So and the ability to kind of get to the heart of a matter. And I'm not suggesting that's that clear cut, but I do think a lot of women have an awful lot to offer to this profession. The other thing I'm going to say is 69% of consultants in the world are in North America. 17%, 27% was Eastern Europe. 2% was Eastern Europe. Something was Western Europe. Asia is something like 3 or 4%. So what that tells me is it's a growth industry for you. For folks in Asia and for folks in Eastern Europe. So to answer your question, and I've forgotten it. I went on a whole sidebar. I forgot your question.
I will repeat. I really appreciate that statistic. I did not know that. And I feel that's something that it gives me a possibility to grow a lot. So I wanted to ask you which of the courses or things like that would you recommend, to get certified?
So it depends what you want to specialize in. I really wanted to, I kind of knew I wanted to be a consultant because the project, what I loved about AIESEC, one of the many things I loved about AIESEC was the fact it was project-based. So I was looking for a career that was project-based. I knew I would not do well if I had a job that was every January you do this, every February you do that. So, so project management, there's lots and lots of certification for project management. There's even consulting accreditation courses that you can take. I did an MBA after AIESEC, or a few years after AIESEC, and that's really where I learned what I would call my analytical chops, which the case study method. I can sit in front of anybody and in 5 minutes, I know what questions to ask, and they feel like they've gotten a really specific briefing, but in fact it is, what is the problem? What are the key success factors? It's just a classic case study method. if you haven't done an MBA, you can also find that case study method online, which is just a systematic way of getting to the heart of a matter. There is accreditation. What else? If your area of expertise is a particular application like marketing and social media, for example, there's tons of courses around that. So having the expertise in the area and then applying the consulting lens just means that you do it on a project basis.
Thank you.
Learn
to understand the concept of deliverables. So that your ultimate deliverable is solving the problem, but clients need to see the deliverables along the way. So breaking up a big amorphous problem into 5 or 6 steps is a really important skill to develop.
Awesome.
Thank you so much, and thank you for all the details.
Thanks, Laura, for your question. I think that last thing was very similar to what we've experienced in AIESEC, so we can all take that learning. But I think David has something, the last thing to share, and then we'll move on to some housekeeping things.
In terms of Alejandro's question about the confidentialities, when you're dealing with, you've dealt with some clients, not sure to share, is one solution for that to have actually obtained a referral from the first client, because that tells related clients without asking that you've got experience in their field. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. It depends. That works for sure. It depends on the industry you're in and what you did. There's sometimes, if I'm doing an organizational review, that an organizational review is code for places in complete crisis. So people don't even want to reveal that. So that would be what you got to be careful. And you also have to, when you're doing an assignment, you've got to be clients like to think that they are your only work. They never are. I'm sort of usually juggling 6 projects at once. It's kind of my max. They're all at different stages. So it's like 2 are intense, 2 are early days, 2 are winding up. So you got to be careful when you're doing an assignment that a client thinks, clients need to think they've got your complete focus. So I would be careful, tread lightly there.
Okay.
And the other thing I would say is, actually, I meant to say this in the presentation. When you get a job, people are really concerned about your resume. Have you done this? Have you done that? How much customers, whatever, they really dig into the details. How long were you there? Once you're at a certain stage in consulting, it does not take long to get there. Once you're at a certain stage of consulting, they'll say, I will get asked, have you ever worked with a healthcare association before? And I used to say, yes, I've worked with so-and-so and so. I say, yes, I have. I don't even finish the sentence. They go, oh, great, she's qualified, and they're off and running. Like the bar for qualifications is so much lower. So you don't have to prove it in the same way.
One last thing, Theresa. If you've got folk in the room now of whatever age or generation who are thinking about consultancy, because it is something that you can do at any part of your career, as a pivot. But if you're focused on folk who are currently transitioning from AIESEC, is there a right time to actually try to make that transition? Like, would you advise someone to first get experience out in the world for a marketing company if you think that one possibility is that in the future you might want to become a consultant in that field? Or do you try to link yourself to a consultant right at the beginning and take that decision, that direction? How would you balance that?
I think it depends on the kind of consulting you're doing. I think if you want to do strategic consulting, like the most senior consulting that you can do, it's a good idea to have worked, not necessarily in that industry, but in strategy. And the strategy can get applied to the industry. If you were doing, you want to do social media as a consulting thing, which is kind of big these days, I think youth is kind of value. But what I would suggest, if you're interested in being, consulting is a skill set in of itself. So I would also suggest trying to work with a consultant or work, and if you're in a larger firm, the nice thing about that is you get to work for a variety of consultants. too. And every consultant does have their own stamp, even if they don't know they do.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome. That would kind of wrap up the questions we have. We have put Theresa's email in the chat, so if you do feel free to email her if you do have anything you want to ask. We do have one or two, I guess, housekeeping things that that I want to mention or talk about. Sorry, give me 1 second. Yeah. First, we'd love your feedback. You know, your feedback makes us stronger and better. So Stefan's going to put the link in the chat box, and please log on and take a couple of minutes to give us feedback. It's a very short form, maybe 30-40 seconds for all of you. The second thing I do want to talk about is Theresa's A-Talk was fantastic. So if you do want to hear another fantastic speaker, we have Madhur Mehta, who is founder and CEO of actually his own consulting company as well. I guess just maybe I guess a little different. It would be like on the finance and tech side, because he's been an investment banker all his life. You know, and he's been in the world of finance. So if you do want to you know, register yourselves for that. The link for that is also in the chat right now, and that will be on Sunday, 11th July. The timing will be a little different because he's based in Singapore and Theresa is based in Canada at the moment. Last thing, I would hand it over to David to talk about A2A corroboree.
Yeah, this is so exciting. So as many of you know, we've created this initiative with AIESEC on a regional basis, which is A2A, and that's like in AIESEC language, the lifelong journey or the lifelong collaboration. This is going to be the inaugural time that in the one room at the one time, we bring in as many MCPs, MCP elects, plus leaders of the NAAs, the National Alumni Associations through Asia Pacific. So it's going to be literally helping to build the tribe, if you like, between the two communities. And we've got the very first one coming up next Saturday. It'll be at 7 p.m. Invites have already gone out with the assistance of the Asia Pacific Regional Office of AIESEC. So if you are an MCP or an MCVP, for example, you should already have received an invite to that. So I'd really encourage you to come along. And for those of you who are AIESECers who are not MCPs or MCVPs, know that that's happening, because we want to increase expectation within both communities that these collaborations are now being developed more and more. And just so you know, so corroboree is an Aboriginal word meaning meeting place. So yeah, I think it's really exciting development, and I encourage you all to come along.
Great.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, David. Again, I guess one last thank you to Theresa. This talk was fantastic. Thanks to the team, Prayog, Stefan, David. All of you have made this possible. And thank you to everyone, who's been everyone who's been pretty enthusiastic and has stayed, I guess 30 minutes or so over time. So really, really appreciate your patience. And I hope to see all of you again next month. Feel free to connect with any of us via LinkedIn or email or anything like that. Bye-bye. Take care, all of you.
Thank you, everybody. Be well. Stay COVID safe.